Hi guys! Over the coming week I'm going to make some real progress on my DIY sailboat refit here aboard Athena. And why is that? Well, the new port lights have finally arrived. They arrived earlier this week, but sadly I've been crazy busy at work, so I only had time to unwrap one of them to make sure that they'd survived the trip over here. But as you can see, they're very well packaged, so I'm sure the rest of them are fine. The primary goal for this weekend is to start painting the area up here. Now, to be able to do that, I'll either need to remove the port lights completely or just remove this frame here, the inner bit of the frame, that's this part here. If I can remove just that, I can paint up here with the old port lights in place, and that would be very convenient. For the finished result, I don't think I'm going to be able to get that into this video. You might have to wait until next weekend to see the finished result, but we'll see. In this video, I also want to show you what I've decided to do about the sink and the countertop in the galley. But for now, let's get started on the port lights. But before I forget, I want to thank those of you who left comments on the last video. I asked for your advice about what I should do with the sink, and I appreciate all of your feedback, so thank you very much. So the first step is going to be to see if I can remove that inner part of the frame on the port light, so let's give it a go. I have never removed this kind of port light before, so I have no idea if I can do this on my own or if I need to call a friend to lend a hand, but I might as well give it a go. And as you might be able to hear, I've picked a nice and windy day to do this. Removing the bolts was pretty easy, so let's see if I can remove this inner frame here. Well, that was pretty easy. I've encountered a few of these where this inner part here just keeps turning when I turn the outside part, and to help hold this in place while I turn, I simply just shove a screwdriver up underneath this frame here, and then I can go out and unscrew this. Ta-da! Well, I've removed the inner frames from 5 of the 7 port lights, and looking at the areas behind those frames, it looks like they need a bit of work, and I'd like to fair this with some epoxy. But to make sure that I don't accidentally epoxy the port light in place, I'll need to remove the port lights. I was hoping I wouldn't have to remove the port lights at this stage because I'd like to limit the amount of water that gets into the boat in case my tarp gets blown to pieces. So yeah, but it doesn't look like I've got much of a choice. It shouldn't be too difficult to remove the old port lights. I'm going to use a bit of wood to protect them and just give them a few taps with a hammer. It was super easy to remove that port light, and the boat is certainly going to get aired out over the next day, so I guess that's a bit of a silver lining. I've removed all 7 port lights, but I've hit a bit of an issue. I kind of knew about that issue, but I'll tell you about it tomorrow. For now, I need to head back to Obelix and take Jökull for his walk. Good morning, guys! With Jökull's walk out of the way and also a good night's sleep, let's continue where I left off yesterday. My timing for this project kind of sucks. As you might be able to see, the wind has picked up a bit during the night. But let's forge ahead. The first 6 port lights were easy to remove. The 7th, not so much. One of the previous owners used some kind of adhesive sealant, something akin to 5200. This is the hole for the 7th port light, and as you can see, there's a bit of exposed fiberglass here and it's looking kind of rough. Before I purchased Athena, I noticed there was some bare painted fiberglass down here and also some cracks in the gel coat over there. So I knew something was up, but I didn't know it would be this big of an area, but that doesn't really matter. The fix is the same no matter the size. Of course, if only the previous owner that rebitted that port light would have used a more appropriate type sealant, there'd be nothing there to fix. But yeah, well, you gotta love previous owners, right? And please note that I'm saying that with a smile. The reason I say that with a smile is because, well, for one, I don't know what kind of circumstances might have forced the previous owner into using a slightly inappropriate type sealing to rebit that port light. And also, if you have a used boat and that's going to be your approach, meaning that you're going to bitch and moan every time you find something that needs fixing, well, that's a guaranteed way to make your life suck. It's a much better option to, when you find something that needs a bit of TLC, just to look at it as an opportunity to fix something that needs fixing and know that your boat will be in a better shape afterwards. I've spent the last hour removing the old sealant and doing a quick test fit of the new port lights to make sure that they fit inside the holes. A few of the holes will need slight adjustments, but that's no big deal. For instance, this port light here. You can see I need to trim this bit here just a little bit, and maybe also here, but like I said, that's no big deal. I will say, however, whoever was in charge of cutting the holes at the yard way back in the middle of the 80s, he might have been in a bit of a rush to get home, because this is certainly not precision work. The part of this video you just saw was shot yesterday. It started raining and I had to scramble to go pick up a new tarp and to put that over the boat. The tarp looks like crap, but that's okay. It'll only need to stay on there for about a week or so. By the time I was done wrestling with the tarp, I was starting to run out of daylight. So I decided to stop filming. But the good news is, you guys didn't miss anything super interesting. All I did was to drill out the old holes that we used to through-bolt the port lights. I filled those holes and I faired a few areas with some epoxy, and that was basically it. And it looks like that epoxy has fully cured, and that is awesome news, because that means I can start painting today. I know this looks kind of rough, there's a lot of fairing compound here, but I wanted to make sure to get enough on there so that I could sand this flush today without having to fair this a second time. So all that's left to do now is to start sanding. Yay! Fingers crossed I haven't epoxied the old port lights in place. I swung by the boat late last night and put them in just to try and keep the wind out. But let's see. Well, oh, that's awesome. Well, not a single port light got stuck. With the sanding out of the way, the next step is to, well, clean up some of the dust. The next step is to mask off the trim pieces. Of course, I don't want the white paint to get on them, and I'd also like to get a nice and clean line between the soon-to-be painted plywood and the varnished teak. In preparation of today, I've done some tests to figure out how to go about doing that. This is my test. I've tried a bunch of different stuff. I've tried removing the masking tape immediately after having applied the paint. I've tried removing the masking tape after about 2 hours. I've tried removing the masking tape the next day. And then finally I've tried applying a bit of varnish on top of the masking tape before painting it. So that's this one, and this one. The latter is a trick used by painters to get really sharp edges between two different colors of paint. The theory being that in this case the varnish would then seep into any imperfections in the masking tape and seal those up and keep the second color from penetrating. But because the trim pieces are super smooth, I think I can get away with just masking tape and not applying varnish on top of that. This is the masking tape I'll use. This stuff is pretty expensive, but given all of the effort I put into the teak trim pieces, I think it's worth it. Ta-da! This episode is proudly sponsored by Tesca masking tape. Well, I'm totally kidding. I should be so lucky. I used the blue masking tape along the edges and then covered up the bulk with this ordinary masking tape. This is a lot more affordable. But the next step is to start painting, and for that I'll use the exact same paint I used aboard Obelix. The reason I keep coming back to this paint is because it's not super glossy. I know this comes down to personal preference, but I just prefer a little bit more of a matte finish. I've only got that single coat of paint on there, so it's not gonna look like $1,000,000. Not yet, at least. But it's certainly a big step in the right direction. Unfortunately, you guys will have to wait until the next weekend to see the finished result. But by then I should be done painting and ready to put in the new port lights, so I think that's gonna be a fun episode. But before ending this video, I just want to give you a quick update on the saga that is my sink. Most of you guys are painfully aware that I've had some difficulty in finding a good quality sink that'll fit into this small area here that I also like. The sink I've got now, the one with the manufacturing flaw, well, the store has agreed to give me a refund if I return the sink, but I can't find another sink I like, so I'm going to keep that sink. And I'm going to hide the flaw by flush mounting the sink into this piece of plywood and then putting a compact laminate on top of that. So what I want to do is to flush mount the sink and then put a piece of compact laminate on top of both the plywood and the sink. So I think that is going to look pretty good. A friend of mine that works for a big kitchen manufacturing company swung by the boat with some samples. This is Corian, this is a slightly cheaper version of Corian, and this is compact laminate. So of course Corian is super expensive, it's also pretty heavy, and the same goes for this stuff. This is just a slightly cheaper version of this. And this is compact laminate, and I've got a compact laminate countertop aboard Obelix, and I love the stuff. And it's also not that expensive, it turns out. So this is what I'm going to go with. But then there's the choice of picking out the laminate that goes on top of that compact laminate. Oh God, life is hard. I'm very relieved that that whole sink saga is finally done with, and I think it's going to turn out great. So the kind of funny thing is that when I first started talking about redoing the galley, a couple of you guys suggested that I should get a compact laminate countertop for the new galley. Initially I didn't want to go that route because for some reason the first two quotes I got were extremely high, but it turns out it's not all that expensive, so it's going to be great, I think. Okay guys, I want to get busy editing this video, and this is going to be out later tonight. So yeah, I guess that's going to be it for this video. See you! Area here. So I've decided to keep the flink. The flink? That was supposed to be sink, but the next word was supposed to be flaw. So flink, I guess, is the day of the word of the day. Word of the day of the word. Yukul and I hope you've enjoyed this video. For more videos like it, click subscribe. Please consider leaving a comment and a thumbs up. It really helps me a lot, and I appreciate your support very much. If you're new to the channel, please check out the introduction playlist. If you want to watch every single video I've ever published, check out the playlist named All Videos. It contains every single video listed in chronological order.